All right, welcome to this week's episode of Dugout Dish Podcast. As usual, I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Keith Glasser. Keith, how are you?
Great, how are you?
Good, good. Excited to cover a couple topics this week. So, two topics. One, we're going to talk about the role of the parent in the recruiting process. And then topic number two, which is near and dear to my heart, is the importance of playing hard and understanding how the way you interact with your teammates and coaches and how you act on the field plays a really important role of how you're evaluated. So let's kick it off with the role of the parent here. I know it's an interesting topic and it can be a delicate one, but I think it is important to touch on, because parents are obviously a very big part of this process in many ways, but in some ways they can be they can actually be detrimental, and we want to be able to shed some light on how that all works. So I'll kick it over to you to get us started.
Role of a parent in the recruiting process. Loaded topic. I think there's a lot that goes into this. One, obviously from being a parent, you want what's best for your son. Or daughter, for anyone who's listening out there who might not be a baseball person. But you need to be a parent first in this process. You need to be informed on what's going on in this process from a recruiting rules standpoint to what the school is like, what the coaches are like. You are going to know what makes your son or daughter tick, right? Like you're going to have an idea of, where they're probably going to fit in pretty well, where they might not fit in. But that's, your role is to be a guide for your son or daughter in this process. I think one of the things where, it gets a little out of control is when you start, kind of feeling as though you're going through this process and being recruited yourself. That's where, I've never written a lineup in my life that had the parent's name in the 3-hole or pitching. Like you're not playing at the school, you're not going to be taking classes there, like your son or daughter is. So let's make sure that we're an aid and a parent in this process for your children, so that they can find the best fit for them, that's going to offer them the best experience from an academic and an athletic standpoint at the school in which they're going to. You are watched and judged, for lack of a better term, more times than you think you are in the recruiting process. There's something to be said about a family that comes in and, when they sit in front of you and, mom and dad are certainly going to have questions, and you should have questions, but they shouldn't be the only questions that are dominating the visit when you're on campus. Your son should be the one that has a lot of questions that, he's looking for answers for. Mom and dad are certainly going to have questions. Like you should, because you're looking to make, the best decision as well. So, it's kind of striking that balance of like, being able to be a parent and be a guide for your children through this process, so that, when they have questions and, they're not, there's so much going on, they're not going to be able to remember, everything either. So, being able to kind of take in everything that's going on and be able to recall and have conversations with your son about what's going on in this recruiting process is going to be vital, for you to be able to navigate this process with your son. So you want to be a parent first and be informed and have good questions and retain the information, so that, when it comes down to make decisions, like you have everything in front of you with your son, and you can kind of make your decision, from there.
Yeah, it's such a delicate topic, because I'm certainly not here to tell people how to parent by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's important for parents to understand how their actions are viewed and can be viewed from a coach's perspective, and how they can have a positive impact on their players, on their son's experience here. And to your point, like, be there to support them, be there to be a guide, be a big fan for them, help them get to where they're going to go, do whatever you can to put them in a situation to be successful. But at the end of the day, the kid is the one who's going through this process. The kid is the one who's going to get recruited. And I hear this often. I hear the word "we," we we aren't interested in that school, or we think that we're better than that particular place, or we think we fit at a different level. It always strikes me as, well, what about the kid? Like, what does the kid think? He's the one who is really driving this process. And I think it's important to separate the two, that obviously you're doing it as a family, but the player needs to sit at the front of the recruiting process. They need to take ownership of this process and be there to support them, be there to hold them accountable, keep them in line with what they need to be doing to put themselves in a situation to be recruitable. But don't send the emails. Don't take their phone and send text messages to coaches. Like, they need to own this. They need to be the at the forefront of this, because at the end of the day, that kid is going to, at some point, going to be moving on to college, and they need to be able to do stuff on their own because they want it. And if you're a 16-year-old kid, or you're a parent of a 16-year-old kid, and you can't find the time, that kid can't find the time to sit down and get emails out to coaches, or send his summer schedule out, or call a coach, or text message a coach when he's supposed to text message a coach, the conversation probably needs to start with, like, do you really want to do this? Like, there shouldn't be a huge motivating factor for the kid to do that. And I'm not a big fan of when the parents step in and start doing it for them, right? They need to learn that they have to do this stuff, that they have to take ownership of this, because when they get to college, it's going to be a real culture shock when nobody's holding their hand to go do stuff. And you're either going to do it or you don't. And the guys who don't do it, they find themselves, not playing baseball as long as they would like. So it's probably where it starts for me, is make sure that the player is the star. Um, the other thing that always strikes me when I go watch games, and I'll try to say this as delicately as I can, but how parents act at these games is really striking to me. And um, my advice to a parent would be, root your son on, root your team on, stay away from the negative stuff. Don't yell at umpires. Don't get so emotionally invested that you're going to go and do something or say something that's going to impact your kid. Because at the end of the day, coaches can figure out whose parent is who pretty easily, either because we've met, or you get a pretty good idea of whose parent is who in the stands. And, it's not an absolute, but how a parent acts oftentimes can be a reflection of what that player is going to be like. And I see and hear some things at these games that are, it's a little shocking. But my advice to parents would be, be a fan when you're at the game, root for your son. But try to keep it positive in a sense, right? Like, it kills me when I see, parents screaming at umpires that are, making $50 to umpire that game. Like, nobody deserves that. And I just don't think it's beneficial for anybody. And it can only leave a bad taste in a coach's mouth if I happen to be there watching your son, and I know that you're the one who's acting like that. Like, it just leaves a bad taste in a coach's mouth, and you don't want to do anything that would be detrimental to your son's potential to play at the next level. And I'm not sure if enough people say that. See some Twitter warriors who will tweet about it and everything, but um, I'll put it out there right now. Like, be aware of what you say and how you act, because it can reflect on your son. And I know that if I was a parent, which I hope to be someday, that I know I'll have I'll be in a situation where I'm going to hold myself accountable to that same standard. But just be cognizant of what you're saying and how you're acting, because it oftentimes does not go unnoticed.
No, it's never going to go unnoticed. I would, to pull a thread quickly on what you said before you got into that, and I'll get into that here in a second. It's the parents sending the emails and the text messages. Like, one, the coaches know. We can decipher pretty quickly who sent it. Is it a 54-year-old professional or a 15-year-old kid? Like, I can tell pretty quickly. The other is, like, when parents email you and tell you, hey, like, so-and-so Joey is really busy with school, he can't get emails out. Like, that's actually more detrimental to hear that, because then it's like, all right, well, like when he comes to school, like he's going to be on his own. He's going to have to go. He's going to eat on his own. He's going to have to go to class. He's going to have to lift. There's a lot of things he's going to have to do on his own. Um, when's he going to have time to? Is he going to be able to handle this? And it starts to raise questions, more questions than you think. And I think sometimes people will send an email and be like, well, we have baseball lessons and whatever, jazz flute and SAT studying and whatever it is. And it's like, like everything is so structured, and it's like, well, when that structure is gone, like now what? Like it like I don't like it, it's not actually as beneficial as you think it is in saying those things. So, just keep that in mind. But the other is just as when you're at games, like there's more red flags than you can set up by the way you act and the things you do at games with coaches. Now, obviously it's a little bit different, at the college level. Like you're not, I'll be honest with you, every kid who sat in my office with their family, like I would tell them, like, if you come to RPI, like you will not talk to me about anything other than the academics or the health and well-being of your son. We're not going to get into playing time. We're not going to get into like none of that stuff. That does not happen in college baseball. Like it just not going to happen, because you're like, you get to go recruit your own players, and you're going to have those conversations with your kids, and they're going to know where they stand throughout the course of the year. And this is big boy stuff. Like we've talked about this before. You get paid to win games. I said it earlier on this podcast. Like I've never written a parent's name in on a lineup. Like you're not helping me win. So whatever you think or do or say, like, doesn't matter. I'm the one who, if I lose my job, like my family is in a hard spot. So if you think I'm not trying to make the best decision and put the best guys out there, like you're 100% wrong. So I think one of the things that kind of gets lost in this is just really being humble in what in regards to the grand things, the grand scheme of things in baseball. I think that it gets lost on a lot of people that, as a like we were coaches it was our career. Like I was 16 years in college baseball coaching. Like that's a long time to coach college baseball. And when you do that, and we have these guys on the podcast, we've had them already. We have more guys lined up. Like these are dudes who eat, sleep, live, breathe baseball 24/7, 365. Like this isn't the casual, like, hey, I watched the Yankees last night. Let me tell you why I think Aaron Boone should have hit and run. Like, no, these are dudes who have a very high understanding and intellect when it comes to this game. There's so much nuance in it. And these are guys who have spent years becoming pretty good at what they do, coaching college baseball or just baseball in general. So it always kind of boggles my mind when you have people that, the level, and you don't have to play at a high level to coach, right? But like you haven't played or coached any sport, any baseball in a very long time, right? Like let's say you finished playing in high school, and then the next time you started doing anything with baseball was when your son was in Little League. Like the game has changed quite a bit. It's not the same. And your level of understanding when you get to whatever is going to be less than that of a lot of college coaches. So I've always made the analogy, like you don't call the plumber to come into your house and then start questioning the guy when, hey, are you using the right wrench? Are you really supposed to do that? Like, well, then why'd you pay the guy? If you know the answer, then you should be out there. So there's a certain level of professionalism when it comes to, these guys are coaches and this is their career. Like, are there some bad ones out there? Yeah, there's bad accountants out there. There's bad plumbers. Like, sure, there are. There's always going to be. That's true in any walk of life. But at the end of the day, like these guys are coaches who are actually working with kids and trying to put the best team out there to give themselves a chance to win. And have the understanding that like this is their job. This is what they choose to do. They're not, your son isn't playing because the coach doesn't like him. Like that's one of the other ones that used to always bother me when you hear that. Well, the coach doesn't like him. Like, Jimmy, if you can help me win, whether I like you or not, is irrelevant to whether I'm going to put your name in the lineup. Like, I've never heard a coach be like, we probably could have won another like 5, 6 games if I had him in the lineup, but I just don't like him, so I didn't play him. So we just took the losses in all those games. Like, no, that's literally never happened. There's reasons why. Generally speaking, your son is going to know why those reasons are to why he's not playing. And I've said this for years. You can go through an entire team, and like, the kids know. Kids always know. And it's generally the parents that end up on the a little bit behind the 8 ball when it comes to that stuff. So I think, and this isn't an indictment on everybody. I was blessed to have a very, very positive experience with the vast majority of if not all of the parents of kids I coach. And I think it became a little bit more different as I got older, and as I became a head coach, and as I matured, and as I became a father. You do end up having a little bit of a different relationship with parents as you go, right? Like, 24-year-old Coach Glasser is not the same as 37-year-old Coach Glasser. So there's some things there that change along the way. So I've like I said, I've been blessed to have a lot of positive experience with parents. It's just I've seen things along the way where I'm like, man, it's a red flag for me. Like, I don't know if I would really want to go down that road. And again, not that you're really dealing with it, but you're dealing with the fallout with the young man who's going to be on your team. And you don't know if the juice is going to be worth the squeeze at that point in time.
Yeah, man, it's such a loaded topic, and try not to make it come off as like super negative, but it's hard to shed light on this without touching on kind of the negative pieces of it. But it, at the end of the day, the player needs to play. The player needs to execute, and the parent should prepare them to execute at the best of their ability, and then not make excuses when things don't go their way. Right? Don't blame the umpire. Don't give the kid an out because things didn't go well on a given day. Like, it's all part of development. It's all part of them being able to continue to get better. And I think there is a correlation there with parents who are very supportive, but let their kids fail and don't let them build up those excuses for when things don't go their way. Those kids tend to figure it out really quick. And they tend to deal with some adversity, which is inevitable, especially when you get to the college level. Like, it's not going to go your way all the time. Like, if you're a freshman, there's a really good chance you're not going to play much your first year. Like, it's just how competitive college baseball is. And if your son has already been able and is equipped to deal with some of those failures because you've given them an opportunity to do it, and you've coached them through those moments so that they can fail better, so that they can get better, they'll be a lot better suited for what's in store for them when they get to the college level. And the parents that tend to find reasons why things didn't go well, and kind of build in those excuses that it was the umpire's fault, or this shortstop sucks, and if he'd made that play, then this would have. Yeah, you can always play that game, but building in those excuses isn't really helping anybody. There's no high school kid, there's no college kid that is trying to make errors. There's no umpire that is trying to make bad calls. And is it frustrating in the moment if you're a parent and your kid, makes a pitch to get out of the inning and somebody makes an error? Yeah, I'm sure it sucks. I'm sure it sucks to watch that, but that's somebody else's kid too. And I've just heard some of that stuff come out of stands. Like, it's shocking, some of the things that I've heard, and it's tough to listen to sometimes, because those kids are trying. Like, those kids are trying to be as good as they can be. Like, none of those kids show up and want to let their teammates down. And if you're a parent, I think the biggest thing is just support the heck out of your kid and be realistic about where they fit. Right? Gather information, get as informed as you possibly can so you can help them the best that they can. But, they need to be the ones that execute. They need to take ownership of the process, and they need to be accountable for what they do and what they don't do. And, if you're there to provide information, if you're there to have those honest conversations with them, if you're there to help them find the right fit, then you're probably doing everything you can possibly do in the recruiting process to give them the best opportunity to continue to play at the collegiate level. And anything short of that, you may not be you may not be helping as much as you'd like. Whether you kind of realize it or not, which is, once again, I'm not a parent. It's tough to say, but I can only speak from what I've seen, and the 10 years of coaching and the 4 years of playing, and leaning on your experience and our network of coaches. It's it seems to be a common thing that the parent's role in this process does impact things, and you want to make sure that impact is as positive as can be, and you don't negatively impact your son or daughter as they go through this, not just in baseball, but if your child is looking to play collegiate sports at any level, it's important, I think, to empower them and put them in a situation where they're kind of the star of the show, and they're the ones who are going through the process with a really strong support system behind them.
Yeah, in short, don't hijack the process, right? Like, I think that's the one thing that, probably the overarching theme of what we're trying to drive at here is it's not necessarily about the parents when we get into the recruiting process. Like, yes, it's a catch-22 because by and large the parents are, in most situations, like the parents are gonna be the ones that are footing the bill. So, it kind of is a little bit about them, but really what you're trying to do is put your son or daughter help them get into the right spot for them academically, athletically, emotionally, everything it is that they need. You're on a visit and you're sitting in front of a coach. Like, some of your questions should be more geared towards, what's the support system that we have for, student athletes here? What type of, academic support is there? Do you have study hall? Things like that. Like, those are questions, obviously, and on top of the elephant in the room is always going to be the financial end of things. But those are things that those families would sit in front of me and I'd get those questions from mom and dad. And it's like, all right, like, family's really invested in the right things for their son. And, those generally the ones, like, those leave and you're like, all right, like, we got a pretty good shot there. Like, we have a lot of academic support. We have all the stuff. Like, we nailed all the questions with mom. Like, we should be pretty good. But like you said earlier, you have people come in and it's like, well, we don't think this and we don't like that. And it's like, well, who's we? You and the mouse in your pocket? Like, you guys aren't coming to play for me. Like, your son is. Like, let me hear what he has to say. So sometimes it can kind of get hijacked from that standpoint. And, you walk out of there and it's kind of like, man, kid didn't say a word. Like, he didn't ask any questions. Like, he really didn't, and you don't get a feel for it. And, this kind of circles back to some of the other stuff we've talked about on previous podcasts where it's like, you sit in my office or you come to an on-campus camp or I see you at a private camp, whatever. Like, I'm trying to get a feel for whether or not I think that we're going to be a good fit from a coaching and coach player standpoint. So there's a lot more that goes into it there, and when it's, again, I'll use hijacked, but like when it becomes a little bit more about mom and dad and less about the kid, like, those tend to, fizzle out a little bit more because I'm not recruiting you. I'm recruiting your son. So, let me kind of get an idea of where I think he's going to fit into our program. And, if he will, and if he will, is it going to be a good fit? So because sometimes you can figure out like, yeah, this is going to be a good fit for me, or the kid. So, it's more or less like be informed, have the right questions to ask. Don't kind of, take over the process, but be a parent in the process. And I think when you get that, you can kind of, it's hard to do, but if you can if you have the information in front of you and you can kind of work through it with each other, you're going to find yourself in a far better place than if it's, you just saying like, this is where we're going to go and this is what we want and this is what is going to happen, because very, very rarely is that going to happen. You're going to probably find a lot of roadblocks along that line. You're going to want to kind of open up as many doors as you can and be open to things and be humble and understand that you don't know everything that's going on in this process and what is expected of you and how to take ownership and do those things. It's a pretty nuanced and intense process to go through from a recruiting standpoint, start to finish, and even when you commit, you're not finished. There's more that goes into it there. So, there's plenty of things that you do not know along this path. And, that's kind of where, these podcasts and things like that we do come into play. But the reality is, you just kind of humble yourself and say like, hey, I don't know everything I need to know about this, and I'm gonna do my best to help my son or daughter find the right place to go to, um, and find the right fit for them so that they're going to be able to thrive, academically and athletically at whatever college they decide to go to.
I totally agree. And I think with that, I think we can probably move on to topic two of the conversation. And, if you've listened to a few of the coaching interviews that we've had, and, I think it's such an important thing that, we probably touch on it in some way, shape, or form in almost every podcast, but uh, everybody focuses on the talent evaluation. Um, and what a player does on the field from a production standpoint, and how fast they run and how hard they throw and what kind of bat speed they have, and can they really defend. But I think that the thing that doesn't get talked about enough is what what things coaches are looking for besides that. Kind of the first place to start is playing hard, and if you don't run out a ground ball once every 30 or 40 times, that you hit a ground ball to the infielder and you don't run 100%, like, not going to be super concerned about that. But if I'm a coach and I come watch you play and you're a pretty talented player and you have an 0 for 4 day, and every single time you put the ball in play you didn't think it was appropriate to run hard, uh, probably going to be an issue. If you don't have some energy getting on and off the field, it's probably going to be an issue. Um, you know, there's a there's a level of commitment that college coaches require, and one of those things is the ability to play hard. And Major League Baseball is not high school or college baseball. It's not the same thing. When Aaron Judge hits a ground ball to shortstop in the big leagues, he doesn't need to run his butt off every single time, because he's going to do that a million times. And also, it's an out 999 times out of 1,000. It's a little bit of a different. It's really just a different game. But if you're a high school kid, one, you're trying to impress a college coach, so playing hard is one really good way to get on somebody's radar. Like, you stick out if you're the guy flying around the field. You stick out if you're the guy who's diving after balls, or taking an extra base, or going first to third, or whatever it might be. But the other piece of it too, if you want to focus more on the gameplay stuff, most high school baseball, the defense is not good. And even really good high school players aren't good defenders when you're talking about percentages, right? Like, if a high school team fields 930, I'd be shocked. So if you think about it that way, running down the first baseline hard on a ball you hit to shortstop or second base, it could be the reason that you win a game. You might extend an inning, or you might lead off an inning by getting on because you decided to run hard, and the second baseman bobbled the ball, and instead of you being out by a half step, you're safe. So if coaches watching you isn't enough reason to play hard, you should at least be able to look into the dugout and look at your teammates and go, I owe it to them to play hard, to get on and off the field with some energy. And I see too many high school kids not play hard. I don't know if it's they're not being held to a certain standard in the dugout, or if they watch too much big league baseball, and they presume a lower level of effort means that guys don't care or don't try, uh, which isn't the case. Like, those guys are so good at what they do, they make it look effortless. It's not that they're not trying. And for me, the play hard thing was always really important, and part of it was because one of my mentors, and a guy that I had a chance to coach with at William and Mary, like, it was a key component of what we did, and it was what made us good while we were there. Is our guys played hard, and it was a standard that we had, and that was one of the first questions that we always talked about when recruiting a guy is, well, does he play hard? Like, does he have the energy and the motor where that kid's gonna be able to show up not just on game days, but he's going to be able to practice hard. And that's a really key component of the evaluation, in my opinion. If I show up to watch you play, you're probably in the realm of good enough to play in the program that I'm at. I'm, for don't give me a reason to not like you because you got pissed off that you hit a ground ball to the shortstop and you didn't want to run it out, right? You know, Jimmy Jackson mentioned the other day, if it happens every once in a while, okay, like we can coach that. But if I come and watch you play a couple times and every time I walk away, my thought is like, man, I just don't know how much this kid cares. Well, then that's a problem. Um, and for high school kids, like honestly, there's no excuse to not play hard. You got too much at stake. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to your teammates. You owe it to your coaches, and you know, don't put yourself in a position where you get crossed off because you didn't feel like playing hard on a given day. That would be like one of my biggest pieces of advice to any high school kid is just don't give anybody the reason to not like you because you didn't want to play with energy one day.
Yeah, the play hard piece is always a good one to talk about because it's the motor that you play with and the energy and the intent that you bring to the field every day is something that does not ever go unnoticed by coaches. Does that mean you have to be super rah rah and screaming and yelling and all that stuff? No, but there's a certain way, when you're getting on and off the field with a little bit of energy and you are running out, ground balls to short to given that hard 90 to first base. It's things like that show that there's a level of intent and a level of care in what it is that you are doing. And if you have that level of intent and that level of care and those things, like that generally is going to carry over into, your preparation at practice, in lifts, in the classroom, with homework, things like that. Like generally speaking, like if you can, and I think Chris talked about this as well. Like it kind of starts with competing. Like if you can't get fired up to compete, like then like you probably shouldn't be playing any level of college athletics at any sport because like what's the point of doing all of it if you don't actually get fired up to compete and then actually give all of your effort for your teammates in whatever it is that you are doing, running down the first baseline, getting on and off the field, being the defensive replacement in the ninth inning because you play a really good center field and we need you to track down balls late in games defensively, whatever it is. I just don't understand sometimes like why, like what's the point of doing it. And I used to say this to my guys all the time, like, look, if you don't want to be here, like that's fine, like we'll find guys who want to be here. And generally, like it's not the fact that they don't want to be there, it's they're getting worn out at school. There's they have 4 tests this week and papers due next week, and there's a lot going on. And I think sometimes they get caught up in those types of things, which then starts taking away from the energy and the motor that they have for games and what's going on. So like, to your point, like if it happens once or twice, like it's not going to be a huge deal. But if I show up to watch you play and I see you play 2-3 times, and every time I walk away and I'm like, I've yet to see him run hard down the first baseline. Like I watch him walk on and off the field. Like I'm probably going to go in a different direction because to me, it's like, maybe not that you don't care, but like the motor and the energy that I'm looking for to bring into my program isn't there. I'm looking for guys to be, Ferris used to say this all the time, be a fountain, not a drain. You're looking for guys that have a lot of energy, that are looking to be there, that are happy to be there, that want to, get better and push other people. If that motor's not there and you're not interested in, trying to push other people to get better or yourself, and, it's going to be, that stuff kind of shines through. It's just that simple question of, does he play hard? Because, like I'm sure with Murph would tell you, like it bleeds into other things. It's not just about running down the first baseline. It's not just about getting out and off the field. It's not, it bleeds into other things. Like they're going to work hard in the weight room because they care. They're going to work hard in the classroom because they care. So there's a lot more that goes into it. And just those simple things, can really be, kind of small tells for coaches as to what they're looking for and what this could potentially be. So, it just kind of is that that small tell of like, hey, if he doesn't play hard, that's a little bit of a question mark there. And then you dig a little bit deeper. But you play hard, chances are you're gonna have a lot more opportunities and a lot more doors will stay open the harder you play.
Yeah, I mean, I think the compete thing is huge. Guys who compete play hard, and you need to be able to compete. You need to be needs to be more important than yourself. And I mean, digress for a second. I want to touch on another piece, but I think the travel ball situation sometimes can take away from the team aspect of it, right? And the idea that I'm trying to get recruited, and my results matter, and they do. But for a high school player who's going through this, I think it's worth thinking about. You'd be shocked at how many times you get really good results when you're worried about winning, and that's your main focus for what you're doing. And um, you'll end up with good results from an individual perspective if you're worried about trying to do what you can to help a team win, whether it's getting down the baseline or getting a bunt down or being in the right spot on defense, and not worrying so much about the individual accolades, but worrying about what can I do to help my team win. And you'll be shocked at how many times things fall into place when you do that. The other part of it dovetails off of the play hard piece, but how you fail as a player says a lot about you in terms of your character. And this game has so much failure in it, and Eric touched on it in I think it was episode 3. He touched on it quite a bit, that if I'm there to watch a game, to the point I made earlier, if I'm there to watch a game and I'm there to watch you play, I'm probably there because you're pretty good. If you fail really well, I think it says a lot about a person, because you're going to fail a ton in this game, and you're not always going to have a really good game. But if you can strike out looking and handle it appropriately, and then run onto the field and go play good defense, and then come back later in the game and put together a really good at bat, like, coaches notice that stuff. They notice that, hey, something didn't go right for this kid, and he was still able to put a good foot forward, right? The umpire made a bad call. He didn't act like a baby. He didn't show up the umpire. He didn't go into the corner in the dugout and pout. He handled it appropriately. He went in, refocused, went out and played defense, and the kid came up in the 6th inning and he puts a good swing on the ball. It's the same thing if you're a pitcher. Umpire blows a call. How do you react? Every coach that we talk to, they will mention body language at some point in the conversation about a kid. Hey, I think, I really liked the way he handled himself. He got in a tight spot in the 2nd inning and he walked away. He was able to get out of the jam, and then he cruised after that, but he handled it really well, versus a kid who, might get a little bit upset about what's going on and loses composure and doesn't have the ability to compartmentalize and kind of get back to the task at hand. Um, that's a learned behavior, right? And Tish talked about that like, you can coach guys up on that, but the earlier you understand as a player that, one, you're going to fail in this game, and that's okay, right? You need to move on. Right? You need to worry about, what can I do next to help my team win, right? If you strike out, go get your glove, go play defense, come back in, make sure you're a good teammate, take a good at bat next time you're up. If you're a pitcher, you get a bad call, a dude hits a double off of you, right? That already happened. You can't do anything about it. Let's focus on the task at hand. And that leads me to just a quick story. I went and watched a guy throw the other day, and he didn't have his best day. But I left the field feeling better about that kid because of how he competed when he didn't have his good stuff, when kids were making errors behind him, and the umpire was bad. He never wavered. There was no bad body language. He just kept at it, and he competed, and he ended up keeping his team in the game. And yeah, it wasn't the outcome he was looking for, but I learned a lot about that kid. So now when a coach calls, I can say, hey, I've seen this kid fail. He's good when he's right, but he's pretty darn good when he isn't right, because I've watched this kid compete. He's going to attack the strike zone. He's going to find a way to get some guys out. He's going to be a good teammate. He's not going to, he's not going to go to shit when things don't go his way. And coaches look for that, because it's going to happen to you in college. You're going to have days where it's really hard. and you're not defined by your successes in most cases. You're defined by how you deal with your failures on a baseball field. Most of the time you're defined by that in life, but not that I'm like a philosopher or anything like that, but I've learned from way more failures than I have successes, and um, I think it's important for a kid to understand how you handle yourself. Says a lot about you as a competitor. Says a lot about you from a character perspective, and yeah, you're always going to need to improve on that. But if you're 15 or 16 and you're listening to this, understand that that stuff does matter. You can control it. So take accountability for your action, take accountability for the energy that you show up with, and just compete. Be a guy who wants to compete regardless of what the result might be. Like, be focused on the task in hand, and um, things tend to work out for guys who have that demeanor. It serves them well in the moment, but it'll serve them well when they get to the next level.
Yeah, the ability to show up every day and more or less be the same person is hard to do. And it is a learned behavior, and I think that it ends up being, it'll bode well for you as you get older. So it's like, and where I'm driving at this is like, there, if you're the same guy, whether you guys boat race another team or you're on the bump and you guys get boat race, but you're the same dude, like, yeah, people are going to expect you to be a little, you're going to be mad at yourself and upset, but we people want you to be the same dude, like win, lose, good, bad, indifferent. Like, be the same person with that high energy and that high motor, with what's going on. And I think that like, it's tough. Eric talked about this too. Like, it's tough to be that guy if you're just going out on Friday night and that you're going to get your butt kicked. And you're just going to wear it for 4, 5, 6 innings so that you might be able to steal a game that weekend. So there's things like that that go into it. And like, this game is so hard. It is so hard to play. And there's games every year. You can go look at anybody's schedule. You're gonna get boat raced by somebody, which in baseball terms, like, you're gonna get blown out. It's not gonna be close, and you're gonna boat race other people. Those games happen. The best thing about this game is that at least at some levels, like, you're going to turn around and play sometimes in 30 minutes, other times in less than 24 hours. So, you have to be able to clear it pretty quickly when you do fail, and be able to come back and respond in a way that is going to be able to be successful and go out there and compete at a high level with the energy and the effort that you need to put forth every day to do so. So, I think it's the one unique thing about baseball, is that it's not kind of like football where you play every once a week. You're going to play 3, 4, 5 times a week pending schedules. So you got to be able to really be able to mentally work through some of the things that might not be working for you, but also be able to get out there, and it's Sunday, it's day 2 of a double, game 2 of a double header, and it's the 5th game of the week, and you still have to find a way to stay in your legs and bring the energy and the effort to be able to stick your nose on a ground ball at short with a runner on second and a tie game in the top of the 8th, and you throw it away, he scores, and you might be down 1. Like, you got to stay in your legs and make that play and get you out of the inning. And being able to do that type of stuff is underappreciated, but also something that I think is what makes the players that end up having really good careers the reason why they have those good careers. If you can show up with that energy and the effort and the compete factor on a daily basis, like, those dudes generally have really good careers at the collegiate level.
Guys who play hard they seem to be luckier, right? Like the kid who runs down the first baseline hard, or the kid who's thinking double out of the box, they seem to get a few more doubles than the other guys, right? And that's not a coincidence. And uh, you almost have to think about it long term. Like, you kind of got to play the long game. That if I play hard enough times in a row, that I'm going to play myself to where things become favorable for me. Like that one ground ball to the second baseman that you don't decide to run out, there may be no consequence to that. but do that enough times, and eventually there's going to be a play where you decided not to run that you could have been a difference maker. And the the opposite of that is absolutely true. Like, you may run down the baseline or go hard out of the box or dive for a ball in the infield 99 times and not get any results out of it. But the one time you do it, it could be the play that changes the game. You know, if you're a shortstop and there's a guy on second base and you dive for a ball in the hole, yeah, you may not make the play, but maybe you stop that guy from scoring. You keep the double play in order, and you end up getting a double play to get out of the inning. Well, if you didn't want to play hard in that moment, that ball gets through to left field, he scores, you just change the outcome of the game without even really knowing it. And you know, you want to get to the point as a player where you don't really have an off switch. You just play hard, right? Like, you just consistently play hard. You consistently compete. It's a learned behavior, and players need to hold themselves accountable. But I think, you know, we talked about parents earlier. Like, I think parents can hold kids accountable, and it doesn't mean you have to yell and scream at your kid because he doesn't run down the first baseline hard. Like, no, that doesn't do any good either. But maybe, you know, if they do it enough times, you know, maybe that conversation of, hey, bud, like, you know, when you don't play hard, you know, that trickles down to the rest of your teammates. And, you know, be aware that your actions have repercussions and your actions can affect how other people act. And, you know, I think that stuff matters. And, you know, you're gonna learn it the hard way, one way or the other. You're gonna learn it the hard way because somebody passes on you because they saw you on a bad day, or you're gonna learn it the hard way when you get to school and you're not gonna play because you haven't learned how to play hard yet. Right? You haven't learned how to practice like a college player. You haven't learned to compete day in and day out, right? And are you gonna have some days where they aren't good, and you know, maybe you don't compete at your best level? Yeah, but the more you can consistently stack those really competitive high energy days together, the less likely you're going to have those lower end days. And it just, it seems to work out for guys who do that stuff. They seem to find themselves in the lineup. They seem to be the guy who, when you are beaten up on somebody, they seem to be the guy that gets the at bat or the guy who gets the inning. And then eventually maybe they do well in that opportunity. And them being a really good practice player gives them an opportunity in the game. And then eventually they might carve out a role for themselves. So it's hard to, I think it's hard sometimes as a player to play the long game and understand that it's not about that one play. It's about continuously being able to show up and put in effort and be invested in something that's bigger than you. And, you know, a lot of times those outcomes they'll go in your favor um, by default almost. You know, you play hard and things seem to work out for those guys.
Weird how that works.
Yeah, I mean, you see that
I
play the
think
other day?
I think
Did you see that
Abraham
other,
Lincoln said, "The harder I work, the luckier I get." And I don't
who
know
said
how much
that?
history. Abraham Lincoln.
Ah, Honest Abe.
So there's
Did
your
you see
history
the play
lesson.
from the Rays the other day? Guy
No.
hit a comebacker. He kind of like cue balled it down the, like, in that like no man zone between the pitcher
Hmm.
and the third baseman, like that full swing, like cue ball job, and the pitcher comes off the mound. He's all out of control, and the dude's like basically walking down the baseline, and he pulls the first baseman off the bag, and the guy ends up being out. Those are the things that I watch on Major League Baseball, and I wish that the kids never saw that,
Hmm.
because like that's the perfect example of what not to do. But because he's a big leaguer, it kind of gets overlooked. Like, you know, it was just that one
And
time. But
I think the other thing too, like you don't understand the speed of the game at that level. Like those dudes are hitting the ball like triple digits on the ground, and these dudes are fielding it like they're a step or two out of the box, and it's already in somebody's glove. And then all of those guys are 90 plus across the diamond by and large. So like, you know, you're right. 999 times out of 1,000, you're out. You know, it's not to say that they're not running hard, but at the same time, like you just took one step out of the box and the shortstop already has the ball. Like the likelihood of you being out is pretty high. You know, so you give it a couple hard steps. You see that you're out, and then you kick it into cruise because you do have 162 games and playoffs if your team's good enough that year. So it's a little bit of a long game there. It's not the the 20-ish games you play in high school, where you can just kick it into cruise control and not play with a high motor. Like no one's going to want to coach that or recruit that. If you're just
once again, it goes back to it's not the same game.
no, not at all.
It's different. I had a scout friend when I was, this was a while back, but he was an amateur scout. He worked for one of the professional organizations. He had his own region, but when he got done with the draft, he would go and he would do the major league cross checking. So he would go to major league parks and scout. They're looking for they're looking for guys that they might want to trade for, some advanced scouting, looking for tendencies, doing all that kind of stuff. And this was an interesting thing. And you're a Yankees fan, so you'll probably eat this up. But one of the things that stuck out to me is that this was like prime Derek Jeter, right? When, obviously everybody knows who Derek Jeter is. But what he said about Derek Jeter is that he never ran more than a tenth of a second difference in his home to first time. In all the games that he'd ever watched him, is that he was like he was between like a 4-2 and a 4-3 every time he hit a ground ball in the infield. And if you've ever watched that series that they put out, you get why he did that, because the dude was so damn competitive. Like, he only knew one way to play. Now, am I saying that you have to be Derek Jeter? No. But what I am saying is that if one of the best players in the world can find it in him to run close to his best time no matter what, you're a high school kid who's trying to play at the college level, who's trying to win games at the high school level, it really shouldn't have to be that long of a conversation for you to understand, let's just get down the baseline hard. Let's get on and off the field. Let's go first to third. Let's, try to stretch a single into a double. Just play with some energy. Act like you want to be there. I don't think it's a ton to ask. And I think it's a really, really simple thing that most high school players can address, and it's going to put them in a much more advantageous situation from a recruiting perspective. And those little things add up. Like we talked about, taking the time to send an email. It's such a little thing, but it shows that you care, right? That you want to be recruited. Well, if you play hard, it shows that you want to win and that you want to be there, right? It may not be the reason you get recruited, but don't let it be the reason that you don't get recruited. I think that's really what the whole conversation comes down to with body language and the play hard piece. Just make sure it's not the reason you don't get recruited.
Yes. Simply put, because it can be, everyone has varying degrees of what they, how much they weigh it and value it in the process. But I can promise you that the compete factor, if you've been listening to some of these interviews, it's one of the first things that everyone says. They're looking for dudes who can compete. And then the flip side is they're looking for people with energy and how do they play? What do they play? Things like that, so it's something that is going to be viewed and weighed pretty heavily on the vast majority of people's minds when they're going through this process of recruiting you. So, being able to kind of, be squared away, play hard, and, as a lot of people say, play hard, play it the right way. Play it hard. Just have a high motor, have fun when you're out there, and roll it out. You'll be all right.
Well, with that, Coach Glasser, I think we could probably wrap things up for today's episode. Before we sign off, I want to remind everybody that if you're watching this on YouTube, what do the kids say? Smash that like button. Follow us on the socials, Twitter and Instagram.
Smash that like button. That's what the kids say nowadays.
Smash that like button.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah. I'm hip. I'm with the times. Instagram, Twitter at EMD Baseball, and you can find some good content on there, clips from other episodes, valuable recruiting posts. If you got any questions there, feel free to hit us up with a DM. And for those of you who are more interested in what me and Keith do with regards to why we have this podcast, is we run a company called EMD Baseball, and our goal is to help families navigate the recruiting process from a place of experience and knowledge. 25 years coaching at the collegiate level, 8 total as Division I players, done it at all different levels of college baseball, Division I, II, and III, and got a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge that we're trying to pass on to families and help them navigate this and find the best fit for their son. So if you've got any questions regarding that, please feel free to go to our website, www.emdbaseball.com. Happy to connect there. Otherwise, hope you tune in next time. Thanks, everybody.